My name is Emma Wilson, and the night my husband spat in my face in front of his mother and sister was the night everything changed. I felt the warm wetness slide down my cheek, not from tears, but from the spit of the man I had cooked for, cleaned for, and loved for 15 years. The room froze for a heartbeat, then erupted. My sister-in-law Karen clapped her hands together like a delighted child at the circus. My mother-in-law Helen leaned back in her throne-like chair and smiled a cruel, satisfied grin that had been etched into her face for as long as I had known her. "Well, about time," Helen said, her voice sharp but triumphant. Someone finally taught her a lesson. Laughter rippled through the room, three women's voices colliding into a chorus of mockery. It was the sound of celebration, of cruelty rewarded. My husband Mark stood tall, chest-heaving, eyes narrowed at me, as if I were a bug crawling across his kitchen floor. He looked at me like I wasn't even human. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't even wipe my face. Instead, I smiled. Not the smile of happiness, not the smile of forgiveness. No, it was the kind of smile that comes from knowing something no one else in the room could possibly imagine, the kind of smile that unsettles, that confuses. And it worked. For just a second, I saw hesitation flicker in Mark's eyes. "Why are you smiling?" Karen sneered, her painted nails tapping the arm of the sofa. "She's lost her mind. That's what happens when you don't listen." "Maybe now she'll learn to keep quiet," Helen added, her voice dripping with disdain. I stayed silent. My heart was racing, yes, but my face was calm. Because I knew something they didn't. This moment, the spit, the laughter, the humiliation was exactly what I had been waiting for. I turned and walked toward the kitchen. The air was thick with tension, heavy with the scent of roast beef that had grown cold on the table. Behind me, their voices buzzed like wasps. "She's finally broken," Mark muttered, his tone almost satisfied. "She should be grateful anyone puts up with her at all," Helen said. Their words landed like stones, but I didn't bend under their weight. Not anymore. In the kitchen, I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes. My fingers touched the phone in my pocket, cool and solid. It was like holding onto a secret weapon. For months, I had been waiting for this exact night. For the moment when their cruelty would be undeniable, unforgivable. Now I had it. I heard their laughter echoing down the hallway, their celebration of my shame. But mixed with it was something else, Mark's heavy breathing, a slight tremor in his voice when he tried to keep laughing. They thought they had broken me. They had no idea they had just given me the final piece I needed. I stayed in that kitchen for what felt like forever, listening to their voices. Every word was fuel, every insult another nail in the coffin of the life I had once thought was mine. Finally, I pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over a single name in my contacts. When I pressed it, I didn't hesitate. "It's time," I whispered when the call connected. On the other end, there was silence for a moment, then a firm voice. "Are you sure?" I looked back toward the living room. Through the doorway, I could see them laughing, clapping, reveling in my pain. My husband, the man who vowed to love me, stood there looking proud of what he had done. My mother-in-law's smile was as sharp as broken glass. My sister-in-law's laughter filled the air like poison. He spit in my face. I said, my voice steady. Right in front of them. And they cheered. Another pause. Then the reply came strong and certain. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't say another word to them. Just wait." I hung up and slipped the phone back into my pocket. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. I thought they would be. I thought I would be crying. Instead, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in years. I walked back into the living room, slow and deliberate. The laughter faltered as they saw me standing there, silent, composed, smiling still. "What are you grinning at?" Helen snapped, her eyes narrowing. "Nothing," I said softly. But inside, my thoughts burned like fire. Because 5 minutes later, everyone in that house would be left speechless by what they saw. For 15 years, my life had been a slow erosion of who I once was. When I first married Mark, I believed in the fairy tale. I believed in partnership and love that could weather storms. I believed that the man who had held my hand under the twinkling lights at our wedding reception would always see me as someone worth cherishing. But fairy tales aren't built to last, not when you marry into a family like his. From the very beginning, Helen made sure I knew my place. She was the queen of her home, and I was the intruder. The little comments started early: a smirk when I set the table wrong, a sigh when I folded the laundry differently than she did, a laugh when I stumbled over her family's private jokes. "Emma dear," she would say, her tone sweet enough to rot teeth. "Mark deserves a wife who knows how to take care of him properly. But don't worry, you'll learn eventually." Karen followed her mother's lead, a shadow eager to please. If Helen was the queen, Karen was the princess in waiting, always ready with a cruel giggle or an exaggerated eye roll. She would call me Cinderella behind my back, making sure I overheard. "Don't stay up too late scrubbing the floors, Emma," she would snicker. And Mark. At first he defended me. Or at least I thought he did. He would put an arm around me and tell them to stop, but his tone was half-hearted, his eyes on the floor. Slowly, over the years, he stopped defending altogether. Then he joined in. Every day became a test I couldn't pass. If I cooked roast chicken, it was too dry. If I made pasta, it was too bland. If I bought new curtains, I was wasting money. If I didn't, I was neglecting the house. My very existence seemed to be a mistake. "You breathe too loud," Karen once said, filing her nails at the kitchen table. "Honestly, it's annoying." I laughed then, trying to brush it off, but Helen leaned forward, her face deadly serious. "She's right. You do. Maybe you should work on that. Work on breathing." That night, lying in bed next to Mark, I whispered, "Why do they hate me so much?" He sighed, already half asleep. "You're too sensitive, Emma. Stop making everything about you." It wasn't sensitivity, it was survival. Over time, I learned not to speak unless spoken to. I learned to measure every step, every glance, every word. My life became smaller and smaller until I was nothing more than a shadow moving quietly through their world. Friends drifted away. Invitations dried up. Helen had a way of making sure I was left out. She would spread little stories: "Emma doesn't like crowds. Emma's too busy. Emma isn't feeling well." Lies that sounded like truths, until eventually even my closest friends stopped calling. Mark grew colder too. The man who once whispered, "I love you," now only muttered, "What's for dinner?" He began to look at me, not as his wife, but as a burden, a problem that needed fixing. And I tried. God, how I tried. I read cookbooks until my eyes burned, hoping to finally make a meal they would praise. I clipped coupons, saved pennies, denied myself every little luxury to prove I wasn't wasting money. I smiled when they mocked me, apologized when I had done nothing wrong, begged for scraps of approval that never came. Every insult, every slight, every cold shoulder chipped away at me. Piece by piece, year by year, they carved me into something unrecognizable. But here's what they didn't know: every time they tore me down, I wrote it down. At first it was just a journal, a place to pour out the pain I couldn't voice. But slowly that journal became something else. Evidence, records, proof. Each cruel comment, each manipulation, each moment where I was made to feel less than human, I documented it all. Helen thought she was clever, orchestrating my isolation. Karen thought she was powerful, clapping her hands at my humiliation. Mark thought he was strong, spitting in my face to remind me of my place. But what they didn't realize was that every moment of cruelty was another brick in the case I was building against them. I wasn't just enduring, I was preparing. Because deep down, something inside me refused to die. The Emma they tried to erase, the woman who once had dreams, friends, laughter, she was still there. Bruised, yes. Bent, absolutely. But not broken. And on the night Mark spit in my face, that hidden part of me smiled, because I knew the waiting was almost over. The years of cruelty had brought me here, to this moment, to the final act of their performance. They thought they had won, but they had only set the stage for their own downfall. The night it finally happened began like any other. Dinner at Helen's house, the heavy air of disapproval already hanging thick before I even set foot through the door. I had spent the entire afternoon preparing slow-roasting beef, making sure the side dishes were seasoned just right, ironing the blouse Mark said looked decent enough. But no matter how much I prepared, nothing was ever good enough. Helen sat at the head of the table, her silver hair pinned back like a crown, her posture rigid, eyes sharp as knives. Karen lounged beside her, scrolling through her phone between bites of salad. Mark sat at the opposite end, his shoulders slouched, the glow of the TV reflecting in his eyes as though he wasn't even present. The moment I placed the roast on the table, Helen sighed. "Dry again, Emma. You've been cooking for 15 years. You'd think you'd have mastered one decent dish by now." Karen giggled, not even bothering to hide it. "Maybe she's trying to poison us." The words stung, but I had learned to hide the reaction. I pasted on my best polite smile and said nothing. Dinner dragged on, a chorus of small cruelties. I moved dishes, cleared plates, poured wine, servant more than wife. But when the conversation shifted, when the insults grew sharper, I felt the shift in the air. Mark had barely spoken all night, his jaw tight, his eyes dark. Finally, when Karen made another cruel comment, something about me being too plain for him, he slammed his glass down, wine sloshing over the rim. "You think I don't notice?" he barked. The room froze. "Notice what, darling?" Helen asked sweetly, though her eyes glittered with anticipation. "That she never learns. That no matter how much I tell her, she's still useless. She can't cook. She can't keep house. She can't even speak without embarrassing me." His words landed like blows, each syllable dripping with contempt. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure. "Mark, why?" "Don't," he snapped, standing suddenly. His chair scraped harshly against the floor. He came around the table, his steps deliberate, heavy. I stayed seated, heart racing, every instinct screaming to run, but I didn't. I couldn't. He stopped right in front of me, his face twisted with anger. Then, without a word, he spit. The warm wetness hit my cheek, sliding down to my chin. The sound of it echoed in the silence of the room. For a moment, the world stopped. Then applause. Helen clapped slowly, smug pride on her face. "About time, Mark. Someone needed to teach her a lesson." Karen laughed, her hands smacking together like a child at a circus. "Finally, I've been waiting for this." Their laughter filled the room, loud and cruel, bouncing off the walls until it felt like it was pressing down on me from all sides. I should have cried. I should have shouted. I should have stormed out. But I did none of those things. Instead, I smiled. Not a happy smile, not a weak smile, but a calm, knowing smile. The smile of a woman who had just realized her waiting was over. I stood slowly, dabbing my cheek with a napkin. My voice was soft, steady. "Are you finished?" Mark frowned, confusion flickering in his eyes. He had expected tears, apologies, begging. That was how these fights always ended. But not this time. Helen tilted her head, studying me like I was a strange new insect. "She's finally lost it," she murmured. Karen smirked. "Or maybe she's finally learning her place." I said nothing. I simply walked out of the dining room, my footsteps echoing in the hallway. Behind me, I could hear them whispering, laughing, planning the next cruel trick. But they didn't know. They didn't know that months of careful preparation had led to this moment. They didn't know that every insult, every humiliation, every betrayal had been catalogued, saved, prepared for the day I would finally act. In the kitchen, I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady. My breath was calm. I found the number I had been saving for this exact night. Pressed call. "Emma." The voice on the other end was low, serious. "It's time," I said simply. A pause. Then, "Are you sure?" He spit in my face. They clapped. Silence, heavy and long. Then his voice again, colder now. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't say a word to them. Don't cry. Don't fight. Just wait. I hung up and slipped the phone back into my pocket. 5 minutes later, as I stepped back toward the living room, I saw their faces change. Helen, Karen, and Mark all staring at me, their laughter gone, replaced with something I had never seen before. Fear. They didn't know what I had done. They didn't know who I had called. They only knew that for the first time in 15 years I wasn't broken. I wasn't begging. I was smiling. And soon they would understand exactly why. The silence in that house was deafening. The laughter that had rung so loud minutes before was gone, replaced with uneasy glances and the shifting of restless bodies. Helen's fingers drummed against the arm of her chair. Karen chewed her lip, her eyes darting between me and Mark. And Mark, my husband, the man who had just spit in my face, stood with his arms crossed, trying to look defiant, but betraying himself with the twitch in his jaw. I took my seat again at the table, calm as ever, folding my napkin neatly in my lap. "What's with the act?" Helen asked, her voice sharp. "You think smiling makes you less pathetic?" I didn't answer. "Who did you call?" Karen asked. Suddenly her voice breaking the silence. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "We heard you in the kitchen." I let the question hang, sipping the water in front of me. Their unease grew thicker with every second of silence. Mark slammed his hand down on the table. "Answer her, Emma. Who the hell did you call?" I finally met his eyes. For years I had looked at him with fear, with desperation, with hope. Tonight I looked at him with something new, resolve. "You'll see," I said softly. Mark's nostrils flared. "You think this little game scares us? You think you can just smile and we'll fall apart?" But his voice betrayed him. It cracked, the confidence leaking away. Helen scoffed. "Mark, don't give her the satisfaction. She probably called one of her useless girlfriends. No one who matters." "Then why are you nervous?" I asked quietly. The words landed like a slap. Helen stiffened. Karen looked away and Mark took a step back. For once I had spoken the truth out loud, and they had no defense. The doorbell rang. The sound sliced through the tension like thunder. They all froze. Helen's hand clutched the armrest. Karen's phone slipped from her fingers onto the carpet. Mark turned toward the door, his face pale. "Who is that?" Helen hissed. I didn't answer. The bell rang again, longer this time. "Answer it," I said calmly. "It's your house after all." Mark swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He walked slowly like a man heading to his own execution. Helen and Karen followed their footsteps, hesitant. When he opened the door, the night air spilled in cool and sharp. And there he was. Tommy. My younger brother, dressed in his tailored suit, a leather bag slung over his shoulder. His presence filled the doorway with authority. His eyes, cold and focused, scanned the room before settling on Mark. "Good evening," he said, his voice steady, professional. "I'm Tommy Wilson. I work for Mrs. Emma Wilson. I believe you've been expecting me." Mark's face drained of color. Helen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Karen actually gasped. Tommy stepped inside, closing the door firmly behind him. He unsnapped his bag, pulling out a thick stack of papers. "These," he said, handing the stack to Mark, "are divorce papers, a restraining order, and supporting evidence. You'll find the details thorough." Mark stared at the papers as though they were written in fire. His hands shook as he flipped through the first few pages. "Divorce," he muttered. "Restraining order. What is this?" Tommy's lips curled into the faintest smile. "It's accountability." He turned to Helen and Karen, pulling two smaller stacks from his bag. "And these are for you. You'll see your names mentioned throughout. Fraud, harassment, conspiracy." Helen snatched the papers with trembling fingers. "This is absurd," she shouted, her voice shaking. "You can't do this to us. We're family." Tommy's gaze didn't waver. Family doesn't mean immunity. It means responsibility. And Emma has decided she's done being your scapegoat. Karen clutched her papers to her chest like they might burn her skin. "You're bluffing," she whispered. "You can't prove any of this." Oh, but we can, Tommy said smoothly. Every word you've spoken, every text you've sent, every cruel little plan documented. Emma's been preparing for this night for months. All three of them looked at me then. For the first time, not with contempt or disdain, but with fear. And God, it felt good. Mark's voice was hoarse. Emma, you planned this. I met his gaze steadily. For 4 months. While you laughed at me, while you tore me down, I was writing everything down, recording everything, building the truth you can't escape. The house was silent, but for the sound of pages flipping, each word another nail in the coffin of their false power. Tommy closed his bag with a snap. I suggest you all read carefully. Because tonight isn't the end, it's the beginning. Emma has chosen freedom, and the law is on her side. The clock in the kitchen ticked loudly, each second marking the shift in power that had just occurred. For 15 years they had mocked me, broken me, spat in my face. But tonight I wasn't their victim. Tonight I was the one holding the cards. The three of them sat there like ghosts, clutching their papers, their eyes darting from line to line as though hoping the words might magically vanish. I stayed in my chair, hands folded neatly, calm on the outside, though my heart beat steady and strong inside me. For once, the pounding in my chest didn't feel like fear. It felt like freedom. Helen broke the silence first. "This is outrageous," she snapped, slamming her papers on the table. "Do you really think a judge will listen to you? You're nothing without this family." I leaned back, my smile widening just enough. "That's the beauty of it, Helen. I don't need this family anymore. I never did. And now I don't even need your approval to prove what you've done." Tommy pulled another folder from his bag and placed it on the table between us. His movements were slow, deliberate, commanding. "Inside here are transcripts of conversations, screenshots of messages, recordings you all so generously provided over the years." He slid the folder closer to Helen. "Go ahead. Recognize your own words." Helen hesitated, then flipped it open. Her face drained of color almost instantly. You recorded me." "Only the parts where you plotted to isolate Emma," Tommy said smoothly. "The law doesn't protect bullies from their own words." Karen's voice quivered. This isn't fair. You twisted it somehow." I looked at her. Really, looked at her. For years she had mocked me, rolled her eyes when I spoke, whispered lies to anyone who would listen. And now she looked like a child caught stealing cookies. "No, Karen," I said softly. "You twisted me. You twisted my life until I didn't even recognize myself anymore. I just untangled the knots you tied." Mark slammed the papers onto the table, his voice breaking with fury. "You think this will destroy us? You think some papers and recordings will erase 15 years of marriage?" Marriage. My laugh was bitter sharp. "What marriage, Mark? The one where you spat in my face. The one where you let your mother treat me like dirt. The one where you chose their approval over my dignity every single time." His jaw clenched. "I provided for you. I gave you a home. You gave me a prison," I shot back. "And tonight I walked out of it." The clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Every second was a reminder that their reign of control was over. Tommy cleared his throat, his lawyer's tone steady and unflinching. "Let's be clear. This isn't just about divorce. It's about fraud, identity theft, and psychological abuse. Helen, we have proof of the credit cards opened in Emma's name without her knowledge. Karen, we have messages showing your role in spreading lies to isolate Emma from her friends. Mark, we have evidence of your infidelity, harassment, and financial manipulation." Mark's face went white. "Infidelity." Tommy smirked. "Oh yes. You weren't half as clever as you thought. Emma has the receipts. And so do I." Karen dropped her head into her hands. Helen muttered something under her breath, shaking her head. Mark turned toward me, desperation in his eyes now. "Emma, please, we can fix this. We can go to counseling, start over. Don't throw away everything we've built." I studied his face. For years I had dreamed of hearing those words: admission, apology, a plea for change. But hearing them now, too late, too empty, only made me stronger. "I'm not throwing anything away," I said coldly. "I'm finally taking back what you all stole from me. My voice. My life." Helen leaned forward, her voice rising, panic breaking through her sharpness. "Do you have any idea what this will do to us? To our reputation?" Tommy's eyes gleamed. "That's the point, Mrs. Wilson. Actions have consequences, and Emma's been carrying yours long enough." The doorbell rang again, louder this time. Everyone jumped. Mark spun around. "Who else is coming?" I folded my hands. "Why don't you open it and see?" With trembling hands, Mark walked back to the door. When he pulled it open, a man in a crisp uniform stood there, an officer hat tucked under his arm, papers in his hand. "Good evening," the officer said. "I'm here to serve legal notices to the Wilson family." Helen gasped. Karen whimpered. Mark's knees nearly buckled. The officer stepped inside his presence, filling the room with authority. He handed documents to each of them with practiced calm. "You are hereby notified of pending charges. Court dates are enclosed. Failure to comply will result in further action." The silence afterward was suffocating. Mark's voice came out hoarse. "Emma, what have you done?" I stood slowly, the weight of 15 years lifting off me with every breath. "What I should have done a long time ago. I stopped waiting for you to love me, and I started loving myself." Helen sank back into her chair, papers trembling in her hands. Karen's face was streaked with tears. And Mark just stood there, his world collapsing, staring at the woman he thought would always be too weak to fight back. But that woman was gone. And in her place stood someone they no longer recognized. The officer left as quietly as he had arrived, but his presence lingered in the air like thunder after a storm. The papers he had served lay scattered across the table, across their laps, across the floor, where Karen had dropped hers. The house, once filled with their laughter at my expense, now felt like a courtroom, every corner heavy with judgment. Mark sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Helen sat frozen, her back rigid against her throne-like chair, her sharpness dulled into stunned silence. Karen stared blankly at the carpet, her lips moving as though she were praying, but no sound came out. And me, I stood tall. For the first time in years, I felt taller than all of them. Tommy packed his bag slowly, his expression calm and deliberate. "You'll each have your chance in court," he said, his tone even. "But tonight, Emma takes her freedom. That much is not negotiable." Helen snapped her head toward him, her eyes blazing with a last spark of defiance. "You think you can break this family apart with your papers and your smugness? Families survive worse than this." I turned to her, my voice steady but strong. "Families survive hardship, Helen. But cruelty destroys from the inside out. You didn't just break a family, you poisoned it." Her mouth opened, but for once she had no retort. Mark lifted his head slowly, his eyes red and swollen. "Emma, please, don't do this. You're my wife. We've shared a life, memories. Everything. Don't let it end this way." I stepped closer, my heart steady. "It ended long ago, Mark. You just didn't notice because I kept pretending for your comfort. The night you spit in my face wasn't the beginning of the end, it was the final proof that there was nothing left to end." Karen finally spoke, her voice shaky. "You're overreacting. Everyone fights. Families say things they don't mean." I looked at her with pity. A fight is words shouted in anger. A fight is forgetting to say sorry but making it right later. This was planned. This was years of deliberate cruelty, of laughing at my pain, of watching me shrink and enjoying it. "That's not a fight, Karen. That's abuse." Karen looked away, shame flooding her pale face. Tommy cleared his throat and handed me a small envelope. "Emma, I'll drive you to the hotel when you're ready." I nodded, holding the envelope close to my chest. Inside were the keys to a temporary apartment, hotel reservations, emergency credit cards, everything I needed to step into a new life. But I wasn't ready to leave. Not just yet. Not without saying what had been buried inside me for 15 years. I turned back toward the three of them. Do you know what it feels like? I began, my voice trembling now, but steadying with each word, to live in a house where every move you make is wrong, where every breath feels like a mistake, where love is rationed out like scraps, and humiliation is served like dessert. None of them answered. For years I begged myself to believe that if I cooked better, cleaned harder, stayed quieter, maybe then I'd be enough. But no matter how much I bent, no matter how much I bled, you still wanted more. Tears slipped down my cheeks, but they didn't weaken me. They fueled me. And tonight, when Mark spat in my face and you clapped, my voice broke, but I pressed on. That was the moment you thought you had finally destroyed me. But what you didn't know was that I was already free. I had already decided that I would never bow again. You thought you saw victory. What you really saw was your last laugh. Mark's mouth trembled, his hands reaching out as though to stop me. Emma, please. I can change. I'll do anything, therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Don't do this. I shook my head, wiping my tears. You had 15 years to change, Mark. 15 years to choose me over her. 15 years to love me more than you feared her disapproval. And every time you failed. The clock ticked, the only sound in the room. Helen whispered, her voice thin and brittle. What will people say about us, about me? I met her gaze with the calmest smile I had ever worn. They'll say the truth, Helen. That you were cruel. That you tried to break me. But the truth won't destroy me. It will free me. And it will finally destroy the lies you built your life on. I turned to Tommy, my shoulders lighter than they'd ever been. I'm ready. He nodded, guiding me toward the door. My suitcase was already in the car. He had thought of everything. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit my face. It washed away the warmth of Mark's spit, the weight of Helen's scorn, the sting of Karen's laughter. For the first time in years, I could breathe without fear. Behind me, I heard Helen's muffled sobs, Karen's trembling voice, Mark's desperate footsteps as he started to follow. But Tommy stepped between us, his voice firm. She's done. And I was done with their cruelty, done with their control, done with being silent. As we pulled out of the driveway, I looked back once at the house that had been my cage. The lights glowed in the windows, but the warmth inside was gone. It was just walls and lies now. And me, I was finally free. The hotel room was simple, clean, and quiet. White sheets, a small lamp, the hum of the air conditioner in the corner. To anyone else, it might have looked ordinary. To me, it was paradise. For the first time in 15 years, I woke up without fear of footsteps in the hall, without the sound of Helen's voice criticizing, without the sharp edge of Mark's silence waiting to cut me down. I woke up free. I sat at the little desk by the window, the morning sun spilling across the notepad Tommy had left for me. On it, he had written in his steady hand, "You are not broken, you are beginning." Those words anchored me as I sipped my coffee, letting the warmth seep into places I hadn't realized were still cold. Over the next weeks, my life became a strange mixture of endings and beginnings. There were court filings, depositions, whispered phone calls with Tommy, where he explained what would come next. There were also mornings where I walked in the park hearing birds sing without anyone telling me I was wasting time. Afternoons where I read books I'd put away for years because Helen once said reading was selfish. Evenings where I cooked meals for myself not to please anyone but simply because I wanted them. And in that new rhythm, I found something I had thought was gone forever. I found myself. Mark tried, of course. He called, he texted, he even showed up at the hotel lobby once looking disheveled and desperate. "Emma, please," he begged. "We can fix this. You're my wife. You're supposed to stand by me." But each time I remembered that night, the warm spit dripping down my face, the sound of their laughter, the look in his eyes that said I was less than nothing, and I walked away. Because sometimes standing by someone isn't loyalty, it's self-destruction. Helen's sharp voice eventually reached me too through messages she sent to mutual acquaintances. She's lost her mind, she told them. She's destroying the family out of spite. But for every lie she spread, there was a truth I held tighter. The recordings, the texts, the evidence, and more than anything, the strength I'd rebuilt piece by piece since walking out that door. Karen remained silent, too ashamed or too afraid to face me. That silence was its own confession. When the court date finally arrived, I walked into that room not as a victim, but as a woman who had survived. Tommy stood beside me, his presence a shield. Across the aisle, Mark sat pale and stiff, Helen whispering furiously in his ear, Karen wringing her hands. The judge listened. The evidence spoke. And justice, slow and steady, leaned in my direction. Divorce granted. Restraining order approved. Fraud charges under review. As I stepped out of the courthouse, the air felt lighter. I breathed deep, each inhale a declaration: I am free. I am whole. I am enough. That night, I sat in my new apartment, a small place, nothing fancy but filled with sunlight and quiet. I unpacked boxes of books, framed old photographs of myself smiling before the years had worn me down. I put a vase of flowers on the table simply because they were beautiful. And as I sat there, surrounded by the life I was building, I thought about all the women like me. Women who had been silenced, belittled, spat on sometimes, literally sometimes, in ways harder to see. Women who believed they were trapped forever because leaving seemed impossible. To them I wanted to say this: you are not alone. You are not crazy. You are not worthless. Love should never make you smaller. Family should never celebrate your pain. And silence will never heal what cruelty has broken. If my story sounds like yours, I hope you find your strength sooner than I did. I hope you know that walking away isn't weakness, it's courage. And if you're listening tonight, if you made it this far into my story, then I ask you to do one small thing. Share this with someone who might need to hear it. Maybe it's a friend, a sister, a neighbor. Maybe it's you. Because sometimes the first step to freedom is just knowing it's possible. And I promise you it is.